All right, guys. So we're gonna just do a quick introduction to our next unit, and our next unit is percent proportions. And so today we're going to be taking a look at what the percent proportion is, and kind of connecting it to what we already knew. So our target for today says that I can solve problems involving finding the whole, the part, or the percent. So define percent. We use percent a lot in our everyday lives. But sometimes some of us don't even know what that means. So like as you turn in a test, it might say you got a 96%. Doesn't mean you got 96 problems, right? If we look at our cell phone, okay, it might say there's 8% left. That doesn't mean there's 8 minutes of life left. When we talk about percent, we're saying 1 per every 100. So percent is just a comparison to something out of 100. So if you get an 80 on a test, that is a comparison to if there were 100 questions, you would get 80 right. So when we talk about percent, so for example, on a test, we might have 20 questions. If you get 18 of them right, you don't get an 18%. We make that comparison. An 18 out of 20 is actually going to be a 90%. So it would be a comparison to out of 100. Okay, so what is percent? Like I said, we use percent when we talk about grades. That's not meaning that there was 100 questions on the test. That means that somebody got them all correct. Like out of 100, they got 100%, which means they're all correct. On our phones, 8% means out of the available battery life, 8% out of 100 is left. Sometimes we look at pie charts. So like the whole thing would be the 100%. And then these sections represent students' favorite sports. So it's not saying 29 students voted for soccer, but it's saying out of the whole, 29% of them, 29 out of 100 would prefer soccer. So we've talked about proportions, and we talked about how to define the proportion. We say what's going to go on the top, what's going to go on the bottom, and then we set our two proportions equivalent to that. The percent proportion is a very defined proportion that'll equal a percentage every single time. So we start by saying whatever we're talking about, the part goes on the top and then the whole goes on the bottom. So for example, with the real world test question we just looked at, the 18 is the part that we got right, and then the whole would be 20 questions. And we set that equal to some percent out of 100. Now, the 100 spot down here stays the exact same every single time because percent is always out of 100. Okay, so it's just a proportion where we say some part out of the whole equals percent over 100. Then we just cross multiply and divide just like we know how to do already. Now, there's another way to look at it. Sometimes we might say an is over of equals percent over 100. Now, that might not make sense right now. Just write it down, okay? Because here in a minute when you look at the question, you're like, oh, okay, that totally makes sense. So, is over of equals percent over 100, or part over whole equals percent over 100. So you should fill those in on the boxes at the top of your paper. You're going to be writing these a lot because to explain our work, we have to write the percent proportion to show people what we're doing. So if we're saying part over whole equals percent over 100, we have to write that and then substitute in the problems that they give us. Okay, so we use both of these forms in two different ways. We use part over whole equals percent over 100. That's a lot easier to pick out when we're looking at real world problems. In a real world problem, it's easy to see what the part is and out of what whole, okay? Is over of equals percent over 100 is a lot easier to use for just straight numerical problems. Like you might see, what is 4% of 3? Okay, or it might say 3 is what percent of 5. It's easier to pick out those is and ofs when it's just a numerical problem. Now, today we're only going to be looking at numerical problems, so we're going to be using is over of for almost every question. When we come back after Thanksgiving, we're going to be looking at some real world problems, and then we'll start breaking out the part over whole. Okay, so here's our first example. Go down to the example box. These are our guided examples. Here in a minute, you'll do plenty on your own. So just work with me through these so I know that you're good. So our question says, what number is 40% of 120. So when we see the words like is and we see the words of, the percent proportion that we're going to use is that is over of equals percent over 100. Now again, part of our work is to show that. So you do have to write this part every single time. Okay? You have to explain your work. You have to explain that I'm using is over of equals percent over 100. You have to write that every single time. Okay? And I've instructed Ms. Sargent to look at your paper when you turn it in to make sure that you have written that every single time. All right, so then the next step is just to fill in our numbers from the problem. So we're starting with our 4 blank spaces, okay? So if we look at our problem, it says, what number is, okay? So attached to the is, where it would go on the top of our first proportion, we don't know what that is, okay? It says what number. So we're going to substitute that with a question mark. We don't know what number. That's the part we're looking for. So we're going to put a question mark there. Now, 40%, okay? 40 is our percent. So in the spot where we have a percent mark, we're going to come over here and we're going to put a 40. Okay? Then we have of 120. So where we have the of, that's where we're going to put our 120. Now, I told you guys back when we looked at them that this spot right here is always going to be a 100 because percent is always out of 100. Okay. Now we have a proportion set up that we know how to solve. Okay. We have 2 numbers across from each other. So the first thing we're going to do is cross multiply. Then we're going to divide by what's left. Okay. So when we cross multiply, we're going to take 120 times 40 and we get 4,800. Then we're going to divide that by 100. So our answer is 48. Okay. All right, so we're going to do a couple of these so we can kind of get the hang of it. The next example 2 says, what number is 12% of 72? So again, we see those words is, we see those words of. So the proportion, that percent proportion we're going to use is over of equals percent over 100. And now we have to fill in the numbers that we know. And yes, again, you must write this. Okay, so we have our 4 blank spots. And the first thing that we read, it says what number is. So in the is spot, we don't know what number. Okay, that's what we're looking for. So we're going to put a question mark there because that's the part of the question we're trying to solve. The next piece we see is 12%. So our percent part, we're going to fill in as 12. Okay, and then it says of 72. So down here where the of goes, we put our 72. Again, over here is always going to be a 100 because percent is always out of 100. Now, we're going to cross multiply and divide. 12 times 72 is 864. Then we're going to divide that by 100. So we get a final answer of 8.64. All right, so number 3 is looking for a percent. It says what percent of 15 is 9. So again, we see those words of and is. So we're going to fill in the is and of is over of equals percent over 100. Now, we have our 4 blank spaces. We're going to go back up to the words and see what's missing. The first one says what percent. So in the percent spot, it says what percent. We don't know what. So that's where we're going to put our question mark. That is what we're looking for. Okay. Then it says of 15. Of is attached to the 15, so we're going to come down here and put a 15. Then it says is 9. So our is up here in this spot goes with our 9. And down here, we know this is always going to be 100 because percent is always out of 100. Okay. Now we just can cross multiply and divide. 9 times 100 gives us 900. Then we're going to divide by 15. So our final answer is 60. Now, notice, since this one asks for a percent, we have to attach the percent sign. Okay. All right, next question. 25 is what percent of 20? All right, so we see those words is and of. So we're going to write the percent proportion is over of equals percent over 100. And we can start picking out our pieces. We have 4 blank spots to fill in, And the first piece that we see is 25 is. Okay, so down here where we have the is, that's where we're going to fill in our 25. Then it says what percent. So in our percent spot, we don't know what that is, so we're going to put a question mark, and it says of 20. So down here where the of goes, that's where we're going to mark a 20. Now, this side over here is always 100 because percent is always out of 100. Now all that's left to do is to cross multiply and divide. 20 times 100 gives us 2,500. Then we have 20 left, so we're going to divide by 20, and we get 125. We were looking for a percentage, so we have to tack on the percent. Whoa, Miss Arnold, that one's above 100. Well, if we look over here, it says 25 out of 20. So this would be like on a test. If you got 5 bonus points, you're obviously going to be scoring more than 100%. So anytime that the number at the top is greater than the whole, then you're going to have a percentage that is above 100. Okay. All right. Question 5. It says 8 is 25% of what number? There's our is over of again. So is over of equals percent over 100. And then we have our 4 spots that we're going to fill in. The first one we see is 8 is. So we put our 8 in the is spot. Okay. And we have a 25%. So our percent is 25. We're going to fill that in. Then it says of what number? So down here for our of, we don't know. That's the part we're looking for. That's where we're going to put our question mark. Over here we have 100%. 100 because percent's always out of 100. To cross multiply and divide, we're just going to cross multiply 8 times 100 and get 800. Then we have a 25 left, so we're going to divide by 25. And our final answer is 32. Okay. Last one we're going to do all together is 45% of 300 is what? So we're going to write our percent proportion, is over of equals percent over 100. And then we're going to fill in the numbers from the problem. So we have 45% comes first. So over here in our percent spot, we're going to put a 45. Then it says of 30. Of 300. So 300 is going to go down here. It says is what? So our is the question mark. And then this spot is always 100. So we are going to cross multiply and divide. We're going to cross multiply 45 times 300, and we get 13,500. We're going to divide by what's left, which is 100, and we get 135. Okay. All right. So pause the video. I want you guys to complete questions 7 and 8 by yourself. And after you complete questions 7 and 8, I want you to click play again, check your answers, and get further instructions for the rest of your class period. All right, so go ahead and click pause and complete questions 7 and 8 by yourself. All right, so check your answers. Number 7 says, what percent of 5 is 3? Our answer is 60%. Now, if you did not get that right, go back and check it. Try to do it so that you get 60%. Number 8 says 80 is 75% of what number? The answer is 106.6 repeating, or you could have written 106 and 2/3. Again, if you didn't get that one correct, you need to go back and correct it till you get to that answer. Now, what you're going to do for the rest of the class is you are going to turn your paper over to the back and complete the independent practice. I want you guys to do all of those, show all of your work on your paper, and then you're going to submit your answers on Google Classroom. When you get completely finished, I want you to go check your answers in your email. If you got them all right, fantastic. Turn it into Miss Sargent. If you missed a couple, I want you to go back and I want you to correct those. Okay, because we're going to spend an entire unit working on percent proportion. So it is really important that we get these simple problems, these simple numerical problems right today. Okay, now if you don't get finished in class, I want you to take it home and finish it over the weekend. Okay, so if you do finish in class, turn it into Miss Sargent, and then you'll just read your book until the end. All right, guys, I hope you all have a great Friday, and I'll see you when I get back.